Hey everyone, welcome back to Installation 00 and part 2 of our Halo Infinite campaign DLC reimagining. Interestingly enough, recently it's been announced that Microsoft have lifted the employment ban over their subcontracted companies, meaning that, in theory, 343 Industries can now start hiring people for the campaign once again. Many of my other esteemed Halo content creators have already covered this in good depth, so I won't waste any time going over the nitty-gritty of this. Instead, I'll just overall recap what we were trying to do here, and basically the whole idea is that Halo Infinite was supposed to be a soft reboot for the franchise and takes heavy narrative cues from Halo CE. And since Halo Infinite was supposed to be the next 10 years worth of content for Halo, and considering that the Halo Infinite campaign we got bears striking resemblance to Mission 2 of Halo CE, titled Halo, it seems relatively logical, considering that there are 10 levels to Halo CE, that maybe each campaign DLC would have represented one of the respective levels of Halo CE released year on year. We've already summarised the Halo Infinite campaign we got as being something of a remake and reimagining of the second mission of Halo CE. We've looked at the Pillar of Autumn being represented as the Infinity, or the Fall of Infinity, which we saw in the opening cutscene of Halo Infinite, as well as narratively exploring the Truth and Reconciliation and the Silent Cartographer, renamed to the Ghost of Barrelon and the Monument respectively, covering all content that could have been launched up to 2024. So today we continue with campaign DLC that could have been released in 2025 based upon Assault on the Control Room, and instead called Rubicon. This mission is named Rubicon after the Rubicon Protocol, which was a protocol instated for asset denial during the Zeta Halo campaign. Basically a standing order to deny the banished critical resources and access to any essential systems of Halo. We ultimately want to avoid the banished getting their hands on the control room, so I believe it parallels nicely. This mission would again be a semi-open world, but would be a huge ice tundra-like area with tons of side missions, very similarly constructed to the original Halo Infinite campaign. Basically, you're looking at a similar method of play as the current campaign, where we have both the open world area as well as some side missions that all lead up to a final mission, like it did with the Silent Auditorium. But instead, there will be loads of areas and objectives and facilities across this area that need to be completed first before you finally move to the control room. The level would start by flying through the cavernous underbelly of Zeta Halo before dropping off to allow Chief to make his own way. This initial section, very similar to Foundations, would basically be navigating your way to the surface. Upon reaching the surface, there's a big pitched battle to take part in, and some Marines and ODSTs, and hell, even a Spartan or two that you could rescue along the way. Objective missions involve preemptively taking down the phase pulse generators. So, in the case that the banished do get to the control room first, they can't activate the ring without first making repairs. Another side mission could involve searching for and interacting with terminals across the region, where Easter eggs and even active dialogue could take place between Chief and offensive bias, allowing us to learn more about the origin and nature of the Endless, finally extrapolating more details on this new unknown faction of the Halo franchise. Another mission involves finding Dr. Halsey is nearby with the other members of Blue Team. They've been bottlenecked into a facility deep underground, and this harkens back to the package level from Halo Reach, where Noble Team got underground to Halsey's lab to extract her and Cortana. Similar kind of intention in this objective, including firefight-like standoffs where Chief holds the line against waves of banished. Blue Team could even emerge to help him hold the forces off. Once this mission concludes, Halsey explains she has been trying to use Zeta Halo's communication arrays to try to rally friendly forces to come and assist humanity. Right as she thought she got a response, the banished attacked and destroyed the communications equipment. Chief and Blue Team extract with Dr. Halsey back to the surface. When they get there, the banished have fortified their position and are bearing down on Blue Team and Halsey with 2 banished cruisers and a dreadnought supporting an impossibly large army. Right as things seem hopeless, a slipspace rift tears open above and the huge, instantly recognizable form of the Shadow of Intent emerges, and is immediately joined by the voices of both Halfjaw and the Arbiter. The Swords of Sanghelios had heard their call and responded. The Shadow of Intent devastates the cruisers and attacks the banished dreadnought within moments, while also dropping a contingent of elites to the surface in their drop pods, whom immediately set about assisting Blue Team in taking down the fortified army ahead of them. The Shadow of Intent pursues the dreadnought, gunning it down out of view and finding a landing zone of its own. The final objective mission will be the approach to the control room, only to find that the banished have already arrived and barricaded themselves within. Taking those face pulse generators down ahead of time was evidently a wise decision. Without the firepower to get through, however, Chief has to backtrack. After retracing their footsteps, they begin searching for the Shadow of Intent's LZ. A series of snowy encounters takes place that mirror Uprising from Halo 2, take place until they finally arrive at the LZ of the Shadow of Intent. There can be a nice cutscene and reunion here between Chief, the Arbiter, and Halfjaw aboard the Shadow of Intent, and the cutscene could come to a close with Chief back on the ground as the Shadow of Intent looms above, its huge gravity lift deployed, and Halfjaw offers a way to open the doors of the control room. Yeah, you can see where I'm going with this. Halfjaw then deploys a Scarab, and this time Chief gets to pilot this behemoth back through the caverns and valleys to the control room, where he fires its main beam to gain access to the control room. Once the doors are open, Chief leaves the Scarab and begins the climb of the control room, moving from level to level on its ascent to the top, carving through scores of banished soldiers attempting to hinder his advance. Finally, upon reaching the summit, he confronts a pair of pack chieftains and enters into a mini-boss battle. After slaying the brothers, Chief walks through the charred remains of the entrance hall and moves deeper into the control room. Upon getting to the control room, Atriox stands at the console. He activates something an endless silexes filter into the room, floating around the centre, in a harken back to the opening scenes in Foundation, where Chief recovered the weapon with the silexes of ancient humans floating around. A brief standoff takes place between Chief and Atriox, and then Atriox activates the silexes. They open, and from them, the Endless emerge. They gain limited control of the ring, but without the Index or a sub-monitor or the Encephalon of Despondent Pyre, they cannot gain full control. They capture the Chief and inspect him, like he's an insect or a amusing creature, and then eerily similar phrases to that of the Gravemind emerge, speaking of Chief being machine and nerve. After a brief, almost interrogation, the Endless activate a portal and simply toss Chief aside. This DLC ends with Atriox talking with the Endless about what happens next, and the Endless being cryptic in their response, suggesting they are already taking action to rid the ring of their enemies. Unbeknownst to all, Atriox included, those enemies include the Banished. A cutscene then takes place that shows a facility with 10 sealed chambers. The facility powers on. Alarms begin wailing, locks and security overrides disable. Lights flash red as the doors to the chambers unseal and retract. Out of these chambers, the 10 proto-Gravemind stored on Zeta Halo emerge and begin forming together. And so begins both the return of the Endless and the release of the Flood. 2026 cycles around with campaign DLC titled The Flood. This next DLC is released, and Chief emerges from the portal and smashes into the swampy floor rather unceremoniously. Upon getting back up, he finds himself in a deep swampy jungle, not unlike the level Infinity from Halo 4. He progresses through this area, but slowly and steadily. There are no friendly units nearby, but the Prometheans make a reappearance. Since Prometheans were designed to kill the Flood, Chief already suspects the worst. Chief attempts to contact Echo 216, but to no avail. There's something blocking his signal. This swamp jungle is the next semi-open world with side missions. The first side mission, similar to the level Requiem from Halo 4, involves moving through various fauna structures hidden within the jungle to disable security systems so he can gain access to deeper facilities that hold whatever the systems are that are being used to block his communications. Upon gaining access, he moves through facilities that eventually open up to huge communication arrays that must be hacked and reworked by the weapon. During this time, Chief has to defend the area while the weapon goes about her task. Once this is achieved, Chief sends a broadcast calling for Echo 216. He receives the call but says his IFF is showing he's on the other side of the halo from him, and that it's going to take a while for him to get across that distance. Chief acknowledges, telling him to remain on station, and then continues on his way. The open world consists of bumping into Promethean units, occasional banished forces, and the odd Endless as something of mini-boss fights now and then. The weapon makes it clear that they have to retrieve the Index and make their way back to the control room to try to reverse what Aatrox and the Banished have done, to try to re-imprison the Endless once more. She identifies the translocation portal system on Zeta Halo and identifies the nearest primary node that may enable them to jump back to the control room, but in order to get there they need access to a few secondary nodes first. The access to the secondary nodes is established in numerous, almost Delta Halo-like ruins within this jungle. The weapon trying to disseminate what the ruins are, considering they are of similar construction, signature, style and date as the stone rings on Zeta Halo. After some exploring and escorting the weapon to different ruins, she establishes something that we already know as fans of the lore, and that is that these ruins hold a great many secrets, one of which being that they have their own translocation network. Julam Dama had discovered this himself with similar stone ruins within Onyx that he managed to use to escape the custody of the UNSC within the Shield world. The stone of these ruins seemed completely inert, until the weapon instructs Chief to go to a particular part, and as he runs his hand along a carved line in the stone's surface, dust falls away and beneath, a metallic crystalline geometric shape appears, deep ruby in colour. Chief runs his armoured finger across the smooth surface. It begins glowing golden, and energy cascades through the stone, tracing lines along the surfaces until they pool on what looks like a carved representation of a door. The energy coalesces and fills the stone panel, and then ripples into life as a purpley blue portal. Chief steps forward and reaches out to touch it, expecting to feel the stone face just an inch below the shimmering energetic surface. But no. His arm passes through up to the elbow. He pulls his arm back out and watches as shimmers of energy dissipate across his fist. The weapon encourages him forward, and Chief steps through. He emerges from the other side somewhere instantly recognizable. It's Delta Halo. Wait, this is Delta Halo. I've been here before, Chief says. Can we radio for assistance from here? The weapon checks some records and replies, no, this system has been quarantined since 2558. UNSC and Swords of Sanghelios ships were assigned to patrol the system and maintain its quarantine, but since the Created War, it's anyone's guess if any allies are still out there. In fact, radioing might just as easily attract the wrong kind of attention. It's probably best we just move on. A waypoint pops up onto Chief's HUD showing the location of the next secondary portal node. The weapon doesn't really speak up again after this, allowing Chief to wander and re-explore some of the area uninterrupted. Some data terminals, audio logs or other similar interactive objects could be scattered about to recap events since Chief was last here. After either collecting them or just moving to the waypoint, Chief activates the portal and moves through, finding himself back on the jungle open world on Zeta Halo, but at a completely different set of ruins. before once again fighting his way through Prometheans and the odd banished forces. After taking a gondola across a lake to a spire at the centre, the next secondary portal is identified as being underwater. Chief moves through the spire and out of the other side, where he simply steps off and allows himself to free fall into the water. Chief descends through the water to a depth of 100 feet. It's a little darker and gloomier down here, but enough to see around. Within the water are more ancient ruins. Chief navigates through the water slowly and deliberately due to the density, but he is able to jump large distances through the water, but otherwise is moving slower than normal. There is underwater life forms, including sentinels that pass by, but as long as Chief doesn't bother them, they don't bother him. He closes on the secondary node and activates it. A bubble of energy forces the water away, creating a void bubble in the water around the node. Chief steps through and emerges from the other side. This one transports him to a very dark swamp that leads to an underground facility. The entrance is dark and buffeted on both sides by thick stone slabs. Chief enters and makes his way inside. A lift carries him deep below the surface, where it is quiet. Too quiet. He moves through eerily familiar chambers until he hears fighting up ahead. But by the time he rounds the corner and passes through the door, whatever was happening was over. He briefly witnesses a few Prometheans translocating out of the room, and on the floor, green congealed blood betrays the nature of this facility. It's a flood facility. Chief immediately realizes this. "Where's our exit?" Chief asks. The weapon brings up a waypoint, but remains uncharacteristically quiet. Chief makes his way towards it through several more empty rooms, until he enters a room that has 10 open chambers within it. This is the room the proto-grave mines were stored in. They have since gone, but evidence of their release is unmistakable. Chief is about to move on when the door behind him seals shut. Prometheans translocate into the room with him, and Chief readies to fire on them, but they move past him, not even reacting to his presence. They scan the area around him when creaking and slithering can be heard. The Prometheans look amongst themselves and then quickly translocate away. Chief moves to the only open door and moves through, and finds himself overlooking an immense gallery from behind glass. Far below on the gallery floor, the Prometheans translocate into the room. In the darkness and gloom, they fire their weapons. In moments, the Prometheans are destroyed, their weapons and data purges briefly highlighting hordes of flood combat forms. Humans, banished, even some of the animals of the ring. The room Chief is in begins to drop down to the floor, and the glass becomes all that stands between Chief and the hordes of flood beyond as they strike the glass, trying to get through to him, barely able to distinguish their features in the darkness. A door on the left wall unlocks and Chief moves through, and after a few eerily quiet rooms, he enters the gallery. It's dark. It's quiet. He turns on his torch, which cuts through the darkness. He can hear movement. He slowly advances into the room, getting cover where possible, when suddenly his motion tracker flushes red. Suddenly the movement in the darkness stops, and everything becomes deathly still and silent. A brute combat form suddenly emerges from the darkness and bellows at Chief, surging forward. Chief fires as dozens more move towards him. He gains ground and seeks cover where possible, and grabs height advantages when possible. Chief does all he can to thin the horde, but as things seem impossible, more Prometheans translocate into the room and begin fighting alongside Chief, turning the tide of the battle. After a little more fighting, the final flood form falls, and the lights of the gallery come on, revealing the chaos and body stacked high, still twitching. The Prometheans begin disintegrating the bodies, unintentionally clearing a path for Chief to move on through the facility. He comes into contact with a few groups of Flood again as he progresses and finally finds his way to the primary node. In this room, a huge Flood-infected creature bursts its way in. A massive rhino-looking Flood-mutated creature roars at Chief and charges. Another boss battle takes place, Chief periodically having to dive clear of a charge and keep his distance as it whip-cracks its tentacles through the air and slices at Chief with bony sword-like protrusions. After a sustained battle, Chief finally takes it down and moves to the terminal. Prometheans enter the room and patrol the area, while the weapon activates the primary portal. Chief moves through and finds himself in a temple-like ruin in a snowy region. Has he done it? Has he found his way back to the control room? He steps out of the temple and beyond, looks up upon the outer face of the Sentinel Wall of Zeta Halo's library. 2027 marks the release of likely one of the most dreaded but anticipated DLCs of Infinite's campaign career. We all know the library in Halo CE is both a huge marathon and a hell of a slog to get through, but at least as far as I'm concerned, also one of the most exciting given the hordes of enemies you're facing. This is all dialed up to 11 in the 2027 DLC titled The Activation Index, taking subtle cues from the Halo 2 level named after the Covenant's words for the index, the Sacred Icon. And to take this a step further, this DLC is something else. I can't take full credit for this idea. I was discussing this with my guy Hidden Xperia, and he suggested doing some expansive reimagining of the level's Sacred Icon and Quarantine Zone. I loved this idea, and as I pondered on it, the realization that it could go even further slapped me in the face. So this DLC is basically a build up to and reimagining of the Sacred Icon, leading into Quarantine Zone, leading into the library from Halo CE, but on a whole nother level. This campaign also establishes a slightly more linear campaign than we're used to in Halo Infinite so far. We're not abandoning the side missions, but it could implement the first action and consequence system into Halo. I'll explain shortly. So the campaign picks up where we left off, the Chief looking up on the outer surface of the Sentinel Wall. Chief radios Echo 216 for a lift. You could have the option to grapple hook climbing the wall for an achievement, and Fernando could even have some comical one-liners as you forego his Pelican transport and opt for the hard way. Upon either hopping in the Pelican or grappling up the wall, Chief finally gains access to the interior of the wall via one of the fortified lookout points high on its outer face. Once inside, he begins his long and daunting move through the wall. This could have highlights of Sentinel factories and manufacturing facilities within that you could choose to destroy or leave intact. Obviously, destroying them makes your passage through the wall a little less filled with Sentinels, but may have consequences later on. Your choice here comes into play later. Encountering Enforcer Sentinels could be something akin to mini-bosses as Chief continues to advance through the wall. Accessing the piston systems to freefall to deeper areas, again Easter eggs could be found by grappling back up these ducts to different attached ducts that lead to secret rooms that have weapons, terminals and environmental storytelling to explore to understand more about Zeta Halo and its true nature. It could be alluded to here that Zeta Halo in its entirety is being held within a time lock. Foreigners were more than capable of this and implemented similar time locks on the Shield worlds. It could be hinted at here that Zeta Halo is different from the others because it's capable of sealing the entire ring in a slip-space stasis field, basically slowing the passage of time to a crawl. To the occupants within, nothing would seem any different, but outside, months, or indeed even years could be passing by. The weapon could make note of these discrete references, but needs more information to be sure. She explains she's going to dedicate some runtime to processing this information, and goes quiet for a while. Chief continues along his way, coming across Flood research facilities where Flood specimens are held within tanks. Some banished forces enter this facility and see Chief and immediately fire upon him. Their shots damage and breach these tanks, causing the Flood contained within to break out and attack. Chief has to fight off the remaining banished forces and then deal with their reanimated corpses as they succumb to the Flood. With the banished presence here suggesting that they're after the Index too, Chief starts moving with a purpose, coming across more banished forces fighting sentinels. After moving through various rooms, including a long, gradually turning, seemingly never-ending corridor lit only by the pulsing energy beams that feed the energy barriers of the sentinel wall, Chief eventually finds himself in an area that bears some resemblance to cold storage from Halo 3. A Xalanin is within this room, interfacing with a holo panel. It notices the Chief but continues unfazed, deactivating the storage systems and releasing the flood contained within. In an eerie moment, the flood moved towards the Xalanin, and it simply gestures to the Chief, and the flood, seemingly responding to its direction, leave the Xalanin entirely alone and go for the Chief instead. Chief, unsettled by this revelation, does what he has to clear the room, including taking down the Xalanin. He searches its body and finds a piece of technology affixed to its arm. Chief removes it and attaches it to his armor's magnetic holster, and the weapon activates nanomachines to inspect the device and see if there's anything useful. Before moving on, Chief asks the weapon to look into why the Flood are seemingly helping the Xalanin. She acknowledges this and gets to work. Chief finally makes it to the valley between the walls and attempts to activate the gondola to cross, but it fails to launch. The weapon identifies a way across in the form of a partially disabled assembler sentinel, a kind of strato-sentinel that had been attacked or damaged and fallen between the inner and outer sentinel wall, partially wedged in place. Chief navigates through the wall to a section where the strato-sentinel's armoured hull had breached the wall. He climbs through and begins navigating through the interior of the sentinel. Its hull perforated and missing entirely in some sections. Within, Chief finds some foreigner terminals and interacts directly with Adurants held within. This sentinel, and possibly many other sentinels, contain the final consciousness imprint of a foreigner. This one was a builder under the instruction of Wise Hands to Forge, Bornstella's father, and the interaction between the two gives Chief more experience within something approximating the domain. He's able to understand and make sense of the metaphysical space between spaces, and even manages to resolve the durance of the builder into something approximating a foreigner's form. Their conversation teaches Chief more about the foreigners in the final years of the war, their despair of falling to the Flood, and their belief that it was a judgment sent to them for the crime of killing their creators millions of years before. The name Precursor is uttered for the first time in game, and the domain offers up information about them that the Chief just can't make sense of. Images of the Precursors overwhelm his mind. Strange cross-references of the Flood and the war between the Flood and the foreigners invades the Chief's senses, forcing him to disconnect from the domain and stand in confusion and disorientation for a few moments before moving on. And the weapon has no idea whatsoever what has just taken place. After eventually navigating to the inner wall, Chief continues, fighting past more banished, more Flood, and descending through more pistons until he finally makes it to ground level, into the quarantine zone, surrounding the library that towers above him. Chief can now begin moving towards the library, fighting banished and Flood as he progresses. Vehicles become available and larger staged battles can be enjoyed before you finally advance on the gondolas into the library. Upon boarding and activating it, the gondola traverses the void between their station and the library, falling into its shadow and then moving through aperture doors to the internal spaces of the library. The long gondola ride plays similarly to the gondola ride in Halo 2, and in Halo Infinite, having to periodically deal with both Sentinels and Flood until ultimately reaching the station within the library. It docks and Chief steps off, walking through a few chambers and corridors until he finds himself on the ground floor of the library's main chamber. Now the fun begins. Chief begins on the ground floor that is eerily empty. A few Flood bodies lay scattered around, but nothing aside from that. After navigating through the side chambers, he comes across the curved, fluid-like screens that line the walls of the library on Installation 04. The weapon draws his attention to one due to the signature it's giving off. The weapon accesses a terminal and reveals that it's a catalogue, an access way to a time-locked chamber. She releases the time lock and the liquid ripples and flows back into the surround, leaving a scintillating transparent blue energy field behind. Chief steps across the threshold and feels static electricity creep along his skin. He moves to the centre of the room as Silexes rise up and begin orbiting the room. These Silexes have humans within. The weapon captures one and brings it down to them, explaining to Chief that she now knows how to open Silexes. Chief suggests opening them and releasing their occupants, but she counters. These humans were likely put into the Silexes at the same time that the halos were fired. If their standard model of evolution stands, the humans within would be akin to cavemen, and suggested it would be more cruel to bring them back now. Modern humans would be as alien to them as the foreigners are to modern humans. It wouldn't be fair to subject them to that. She returns the Silex to the rest. Chief moves back to the threshold and steps back into the library side chambers. The weapon reinstates the time lock and the fluid barrier returns. Chief moves off, making his way to the first elevator. He rides it to the top and is immediately set upon by hordes of flood. A quick trigger finger keeps him alive as he quickly navigates through the next level of the library. This pattern continues as Chief continues to rise through the respective levels of the library. He comes across Banished, who have been setting up a fortification and systems to try to crack into the catalogues. This doesn't bode well. They have huge cutting tools and even explosives. He clears out the Banished forces quickly and effectively and then polices the explosives. The catalogue they're trying to access draws the weapon's attention. She releases the lock and Chief moves through, revealing Silexes that contain another humanoid species. The weapon is awestruck for a moment, then reveals that the creatures within these are forerunners. Chief remembers how his interaction with the Didact had gone in Requiem, but then equally recalls his brief interaction with the Librarian. Would releasing these forerunners go down like the Didact or the Librarian? It was anybody's guess, but Chief decided not to run the risk. The weapon expresses regret, but ultimately accepts Chief's decision. They step back outside. Chief destroys the cutting equipment and gathers up the explosives. He takes the explosives and puts them inside the Forerunner catalogue, and then asks the time lock to be instated again, effectively denying the Banished the tools they need to finish the job. They continue through the library, navigating its halls and chambers and lifts until they reach the second to highest floor. Once again, the weapon draws Chief to a catalogue. They access it and step inside, and in this one, endless Silexes rise up. Dozens of them. If Atriox or the Banished find them, the endless forces will be bolstered even higher, and there's no telling whether humanity in their current state would even be able to stop them. Even now, after Atriox released the endless that he already has, there seems to be too many of them, and their kinship with the Flood was more than unsettling. They have to be destroyed. Chief asks how many there are that contain the endless. The weapon responds there are 7 of the chambers on this floor, all containing endless. All 7 must be destroyed entirely. The explosives the Banished brought with them could be useful here. They backtrack to the Forerunner catalogue, encountering more Banished and more Flood as they go. Once clear, they drop the time lock, Chief retrieves the explosives, and return to the endless catalogues. One by one, they open them, place the explosive, begin the Silex release process, and then quickly backtrack to the entrance, where they exit, reinstate the time lock, and move on to the next. When the endless exit their Silexes, they'll be stranded within the catalogue chambers due to the time locks, and then the explosives will go off, hopefully killing all of the endless. They successfully deploy 5 of the explosives. On the 6th catalogue room, the Silexes deploy too quickly and Chief has to fight past the endless. A brutal attack knocks Chief to the ground and the remaining explosives fall away into a seemingly endless void below. He quickly gets to his feet, fights off the endless and retreats to the catalogue entrance, killing a couple more who manage to get outside. They seal the time lock and move to the 7th and final catalogue. With no explosives left, there's only one option. Chief asks the weapon to drop the time lock. He then tells her to close the lock behind him. She objects, but he tells her that's the only way. She contests that once he's inside, he won't be able to unlock it once he's done. She'll have to make a calculation based upon the time dilation effects she's so far measured and release it after a mutually agreed period of time, but she's not finished those calculations yet. He simply says he doesn't know how long it's going to take, but that he trusts her. He walks into the time lock and the weapon seals it. Our perspective here actually stays with the weapon while she worryingly paces back and forth on the terminal, and then she hears a noise nearby. A cutscene interjects here and shows that the Banished have arrived in the library and begun moving through at speed to get to the index. They have human prisoners to retrieve the index itself, but begin to rise through the library. They get to the second to highest floor and move past the catalogue. Chief is within. The weapon hides inside the terminal, the only suggestion of her presence being a tiny blue orb floating amongst the other holographics. A brute curiously looks at the terminal, but ultimately loses interest and follows the pack. After they're gone, the weapon re-emerges and watches the last of them disappear around the corner. She turns back to the time lock. An uncomfortable amount of time passes, and finally, the fluid energy field displaces and oscillates in the shape of a hand. The weapon disables the time lock, and Chief falls forward out of the catalogue, landing on the floor and rolling onto his back. His armour is covered in alien blood and is severely more damaged than it was when he went in. She raises the time lock again. "Are you okay?" the weapon asks. Chief is obviously injured and exhausted, but dismisses it and replies through a pained grunt, "I'm fine." "How long?" the weapon asks. 5 hours 27 minutes. The weapon responds, "Only 3 minutes passed here." Chief slowly stands up, stretches his shoulders and shrugs off the monumental battle he just undertook. "I was leaning against the door for longer than that." The weapon smiles in response to his dry humour. He gives her a nod and tells her good job, before picking her back up and popping her chip back into his helmet. Chief gets on the move again when she updates him on the Banished moving past to get to the index. Chief double times, and on his way to the lift to the top floor, the ground beneath his feet ripples nearly imperceptibly. The explosives were going off, their intense detonations being somewhat contained. The lift rises and Chief fights through Banished and Flood forces on his way to the index. When he gets there are 6 humans being held hostage by a pack of 3 brutes led by an elite general. The elite steps away from the brutes and steps up to challenge the Chief. One of the hostages manages to break free and kicks a brute in the knee, causing it to briefly stumble, at which point the human leaps at the brute and throws both of them over the edge, sacrificing themselves and taking one of the brutes with them in a desperate last-ditch effort to help Chief achieve the greater good. The other humans are pinned to the spot to avoid them having the same idea. Chief then begins his battle with the elite general, a boss fight that culminates in the elite swinging his energy sword wildly, accidentally cutting down one of the brutes, and then the Flood arriving, capturing the elite and presenting a distraction enough for Chief to execute the last brute, allowing him and the hostages to board the index lift and descend to the ground floor. If you left the Sentinel factories intact earlier, there's a few Flood throughout the library. On your descent to the ground, Chief retrieves the index. They move outside to the gondolas, where they ride them back into the quarantine zone to find human and Sangheili forces have established a large forward operating base in the shadow of the library, and Chief can interact with different characters here and make his way to be extracted by Echo 216 for the next DLC. If you decided to destroy the Sentinel factories earlier, however, the Flood overrun the library floor by floor. They reach the ground floor and the Chief retrieves the index, and then they have to fight their way back to the gondola to get outside of the library for extraction. In the process, all of the humans are killed, and it's a hell of a fight back outside. When Chief does finally get outside, the forward operating base that was established there has been overrun, and only Flood remain. It's a constant battle just to get back to the extraction by Echo 216, and Chief is reminded every step of the way of the loss of human and elite lives. And that brings an end to the Activation Index DLC, and Part 2 of our Halo Infinite campaign DLC, Reimagining. Join me for Part 3, where we finally cover 2 betrayals, keys, and the Maw, and their reimagining for Halo Infinite DLC. And until then, Thanks for watching. If I could respectfully ask, if you enjoyed this video, consider hitting the subscribe button and the little bell icon so you're told the second a new video hits the shelves. Hit this video with a like if you enjoyed, and if not, it's not a problem. And be sure to pop a comment below to throw me an idea on what you want to see next. Massive thanks to my awesome patrons, Spartan10148, the Metarch of my facility, Falcon, Prophet, Leon, Sylphia, Mikhail, and Irrefutable, the monitors of the array, Darian, Flaming Halo, Cameron, Spartan0137, the Cave Potato, Andrew, Shia, Dakota, and Ghost, my diligent sub-monitors, my fleet of Strato Sentinels, and my loyal enforcers, and all other patrons who have supported the channel and helped keep the domain operational. Huge props and recognition to Todd Morrison, Spartan137, Wesley Stuckey, and Jacob Kemp for jumping on as Tier 0 Transcendent YouTube members. You guys are epic. Shout out to John for reasons. And if you want to help support the channel and score yourself tons of perks and merch, head over to Patreon or consider becoming a YouTube member. Links, as ever, are in the description. Much love, take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.